so I'm going to introduce the moderator for our second to last panel for today. And this is the admissions and funding panel. So our moderator is Erin Lee. Erin Lee is a second year student at UCLA Law. She's an LA native and she graduated from Dartmouth College in 2018 with a BA in neuroscience. So just because I know there were some questions earlier, people asking, do I have to do pre-law to apply to law school? Erin is a great example that no, you do not. You can do neuroscience and still end up in law school. Prior to law school, she worked in journalism and most recently as a reporter at the Los Angeles Daily Journal covering legal education and the state bar. Erin is the admissions chair for UCLA Law's Asian and Pacific Islander Law Students Associations, and she also serves as a managing editor for both the UCLA Law Review and the UCLA Women's Law Journal. This past summer, she externed for Chief Judge Philip S. Gutierrez on the U.S. District Court in the Central District of California. So I will turn it over to Erin to introduce our next panelists and enjoy.
Great. Thank you so much, Katie, for the introduction. I'm so excited to be here with you all for our admissions and funding panel. This is a great opportunity to hear from people on the other side of the process, from admissions and financial aid, and also from a current student who went through the process recently and made it out the other side. So before we get started, I'm just going to do some quick introductions of our panelists. So first we have Tony Tolbert. Tony is the Assistant Director of Admissions at UCLA Law, but he's also worn a couple different hats at UCLA. He served as Director of Learning Environment and Academic Affairs, and he's also served as Associate Director of Outreach, leading our Law Fellows program. So Tony knows UCLA Law inside and out. And if you've ever had burning questions that you wanted to ask an admissions officer, now is the perfect time. Thanks, Tony. We also have Biljana Vuletic. Biljana is our financial aid director at UCLA Law. She's been serving in the position since 2010, and she has over 25 years of financial aid experience at both private and public higher ed institutions. So Biljana really is an expert in financial aid, so we're so lucky to hear from her today. Last but not least, we have Julia Bach. Julia is a 1L at UCLA Law, a first-year student. She grew up in the Southern California area, and she studied politics and journalism at NYU. And at UCLA, Julia is involved with the Critical Race Studies program, the Journal of Law and Technology, the First Gen Law Students Association, and APILSA, the Asian Pacific Islander Law Students Association. So thank you all so much for being here. And just a quick note, we'll leave about 10 to 15 minutes at the end of our panel for audience questions. So please put your questions in the Q&A box and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can. So for our first question, I'm going to start with you, Julia. So law school tuition is expensive. Many of us are still paying off our undergraduate loans as well. During our panel, we're going to go through financial aid and scholarships and other funding sources available. But just to get your initial thoughts, what would you say to applicants interested in applying to law school, but for whom the cost is a significant hurdle?
Hi, so yeah, that was definitely me last year. I knew that I wanted to go to law school, but finances were a really big consideration of mine, and I'm sure it is for everyone in law school. First of all, I want to say law school will always be there. You don't have to go straight through like I did. I went straight through, so I'm completely reliant on UCLA scholarship and loans, but I know other people who have taken some time off to work and save up some money before, and it gives them some financial cushion. Second of all, I want to say there are resources out there. When I was applying to law schools, I knew I did not have the money to even apply to these schools. So I looked into, I Googled like, how do people get fee waivers? And then sometimes after you take the LSAT, the schools will get like your email from LSAC, and then they will send you fee waivers. So I remember I didn't pay for any application fees, because I just completely relied on fee waivers. I also applied for the LSAC fee waiver thing, which paid for 2 LSATs and covered the or LSAC reports and the credential assembly service. And you should also check, like if you're still an undergrad, it would be a good resource to tap into your school's graduate program advising programs, because when I was at NYU, when I started at NYU, the pre-law program was basically non-existent, but towards the end of my time there, we actually got a pre-law advisor. And they also sent us links to different funding programs. So people were able to apply for up to like $500 to just help with paying for LSAT and applications like that. And I think another thing I would say is I actually worked throughout high school and college, like every single semester, every single summer. And it was a lot of pressure for me, I think, to go to school all the time while working like 20 hours a week all throughout college too. But I think that also prepared me better in law school to time manage everything, because in law school, like your readings take up so much time and then you try to get involved in school activities also. But yeah, I just want to say there's a lot of resources out there. Google is your friend. I used YouTube, Reddit. I listened to podcasts on Seven Sage. Like there were podcasts, I think there was a podcast or like a YouTube video with Seven Sage with like Dean Schwartz. And I just like try to get as much information as possible to see what other people are doing. So yeah, just try to find as much information as you can out there.
Great, thanks so much, Julia. And we'll talk more about some of the resources available for students. So B, I'm gonna turn to you. Can you explain who's eligible for financial aid and what kinds of aid are available to students?
Sure. So at least particularly in UCLA Law School, we have sort of different pots of money, if you will. One is particularly for students who are, or who we determine to be a needy student. So we have what we call a need component of the Dean Scholarship, but also a merit component of the Dean Scholarship. So students could qualify for need, merit, or both. So depending on the qualifications. For the merit scholarship, it's sort of straightforward because the admissions office already has the information available to them to make that determination. So there's no additional information needed from the student. And then the financial aid office basically reviews students' application for the need component. And so for that particular scholarship, we do require students to submit their FAFSA application with their parental information, as well as a short need application that it's on the law school side specifically. All of this usually is done after students admitted, and so there is really no preparation for this to be done prior to it. But once a student is admitted, all the information becomes available to them, and then they'll be able, of course, to fill that out. So this is basically for the gift components of what the law school offers. And I think everybody's sort of aware that the government does not offer any gift aid to graduate and professional students. So that's where the law school sort of tries to step in and at least try to determine students who are the neediest so that we can sort of continue to help that population as well. So apart from the scholarships that I just mentioned, which is again, Dean Scholarship that has those two components, usually when a student receives a scholarship, it is a commitment for 3 years. So if a student receives one or the other or both in their first year, there is no reapplication in a way. That scholarship will follow them for the remainder of their law career. So they will receive the same awards for the 2L and 3L years. We also have a small pool of donor-based scholarships. So these are the gifts that come to law school from different donors. And many times they're very specific as to what they're looking for. In many cases, it could be, let's say, specific based on a field of law that you are interested in or you're practicing. So sometimes, let's say we have a scholarship in entertainment or maybe just public interest or just very specific to that. Sometimes they're sort of more broader, or maybe there's no restrictions to it. So we try to sort of let students know to give us more information about themselves so that we can sort of determine what sort of scholarship they could qualify for. So for the incoming students, there is no, again, additional application to be considered for these scholarships. These are sort of scholarships, the students are considered for automatically, and Dean Schwartz, of course, is the one who would be awarding these scholarships to students. And then in their second and third year, students will have the opportunity to submit the application for these small scholarships that I just mentioned. And these are not commitments, they're basically a one-year scholarships. And students, of course, will have the opportunity to apply for their 2L as well as 3L years. So apart from the gift aid, of course, there is a federal student loans or private loans, whichever students, of course, decide to take out. We can go in more detail about that if a student have questions, but I would probably just want to mention that given the fact in the first year, as you as students could attest to that it's hard to work and go to school at the same time, because it does have a lot of commitment on your part in terms of making sure that your first year grades are up to par. And so it is not recommended for students to work in the first year. However, there are opportunities for students to engage in some work on campus or maybe off campus during the 2L and 3L years.
Great, thanks. That's also helpful. So then Tony, B touched a little bit on the timeline, but from the admissions office perspective, does applying for financial aid affect your application in any way, or what does that process look like?
Thanks, Erin, and thanks to the organizers for having us here today. We really appreciate this opportunity. So applying for financial aid has no impact whatsoever on the application or admissions process. In fact, the financial aid aspect comes after students are admitted, right? So there's no problem there. There's no issue. There's no entanglement, right? And so we encourage students to apply for aid, right? That's what it's there for. And just to highlight a couple of points that Julia made, in addition to applying for aid from a particular school, there are a lot of outside scholarships, private scholarships, and that students can and should apply for. And there's a whole host from different companies, nonprofit organizations, bar associations. Some of them are targeted for students from particular communities and backgrounds. Others are more wide open. And so I encourage all applicants to look at this time as an opportunity to get your hustle on, for lack of a better term. And so for those of you who are accustomed to hustling, like that, the hustle doesn't stop now. And for those of you who have not had to hustle much up until this point in time, now would be a good time to start, because that's a really open opportunity to scoop up some free money without a whole lot of additional work.
Yeah, great. Those are great points. So then, Julia, I'm going to come back to you. So thinking back to a year ago as an incoming 1L, what was your process of looking for scholarships like? And what was that process of applying and then applying for financial aid like for you?
So I did the application for the LSAT fee waiver thing, and I think it happened pretty quickly. Like they got back to me in like a month, and that made things a lot more affordable for me. I had to submit FAFSA for all the schools that I was applying to. And then I think depending on the school, some schools like UCLA required like individual financial need forms that asked for more information. And before choosing what schools to apply to, I think you need to think about like your priorities. Like, is it cost, location, specializations, professors, ranking? For me, I knew cost, location, and ranking were all important. So I knew going to a UC law school would be cheaper than many other schools. And I'm originally from California, so I knew that I would love to go back and be closer to family also. And I had originally told myself, since UCLA was my dream school, I told myself I'd be happy to go for any price. But then after you get in, you start thinking and doing the calculations, and you start getting scholarship offers from other schools. And then you kind of realize you're not okay after. So that was me. I'm not sure how it is for other students, but for me, I had at first told myself, okay, I'll go to UCLA for any price. And then after I started getting scholarship offers from other schools, I was like, okay, maybe not. But thankfully, UCLA did give me a good scholarship offer, and I tried to negotiate, but I think I also didn't apply to a lot of schools, so that wasn't really like a viable option for me. But I was happy and content with the offer that I got, and I committed to UCLA pretty quickly. And it did make my decision-making process a lot easier, because after I like calculated everything, like UCLA was around the same price that it would have been to go to other peer schools. So it worked out really well for me. I want to say ABA 509 reports, law school transparency website are your friends. They have a lot of information on like how much scholarships students normally get, how much debt students come out with. And I think for people who have never had student loans before, the idea of taking out student loans for grad school sounds really intimidating. And I want to tell you, like, everyone does it. And in the first semester, I actually had a phone call with Biljana. I don't know if you remember this, but I was like so stressed, and I was like almost tearing up while talking to her about how much debt I'm going to have when I was going to leave law school. But then she talked to me and said, like, that's pretty normal. It's pretty standard. And I think just because I'm thankful that because I got my student loans, I was able to stop working part-time jobs, and in law school I can just focus on school. So everything worked out in the end, and I'm glad that I had that call with Biljana in the first semester.
Yeah, that's all great to hear. And I guess just to clarify, the 509 reports are every law school does that. And they're filled out every year, and they're posted on law school admission websites, and it has lots of information about law school. So those are all really helpful. And then I guess I would also say that maybe a little bit different from undergrad. I think the process of talking to the admissions office and the financial aid office through the application process is a little bit more open, I think. So I think negotiating and talking to the law schools is pretty standard. So that's definitely something you should take advantage of through the process. Okay, so then Biljana, I'm going to come back to you. Just for big picture, how common is financial aid at UCLA? About what percentage of students are getting some kind of assistance?
Yes, so financial aid is very common. Actually, over 90% of students, of our JD students, receive some form of financial aid. And just over 80% of students receive some gift aid. So that is definitely a vast majority of our population, of course, of students that do rely on financial aid. I will also just mention, since Julia was talking about loans and how common that is, I don't know if it would, just to put it in perspective, what the debt for a graduate student, let's say from 2020, is looking like right now. So we actually have a student who graduated, let's say, for the on average, somebody who graduated 2020, their debt level is about 125,000. So just to kind of give a perspective as to what that level is at graduation.
Great, thanks. So then I guess, Tony, I'm going to come back to you just on a couple admissions questions. I guess first, can you talk a little bit about what the negotiating process kind of looks like from your perspective, from your side?
Absolutely. Thanks. So, you hear a lot about, negotiating financial aid, and I just want to try to maybe pull the curtain back a little bit and just be very transparent, at least as far as UCLA goes, but the same pertains to many other law schools. Law schools understand that it's a competitive marketplace, right? And that talented students are going to be receiving typically admissions offers from a lot of schools and financial aid packages from various schools. And so that, provides you as the applicant and admit some degree of leverage, for lack of a better term. And many schools are open to receiving information about your other offers, where else you've been admitted, what other financial aid packages that you've been offered. Schools don't guarantee that they're going to match your highest offer necessarily, right? But that's helpful information to share. And that can be tricky. Like some of us come from families where, it's impolite to talk about money, or we may not feel empowered to ask for more. And so my encouragement to you is to understand your power, if you will, and in that situation, that There's nothing impolite, there's nothing unprofessional about, asking for a reconsideration of your scholarship package. You want to do it in a way that's, courteous and respectful of the process. We've had students who came at us like this, well, such and such a schools offered me, this amount of money, what are you going to do for me? That's not designed to work so well, right? That's designed, for someone to say, well, actually, we're not going to do anything more for you. So, if you want to come, and if not, step on, right? So, you want to handle yourself in a way that's, respectful and appropriate, but there's nothing wrong at all about asking for more money. And for those of you for whom the term negotiation seems big and scary, like it's some, multi-million dollar deal, think of it in terms of educating law schools, sharing information with other law schools about what other action you have, and that you're actually doing them a service, right? Here's information that I think might be helpful for you to reconsider my initial award. Can we talk about that and find out what their process is for submitting offers from other schools?
Great, thanks. That's so helpful. So then, Tony, we've gotten some questions about students who are worried about having a low GPA or a low LSAT score. What's your advice to students who have concerns like that? And then for our audience in particular, applicants of color, do you have tips on approaching the law school application?
Sure. Good news, bad news. Good news is that the application process is very finite. There are only so many pieces to it, right? There's the form of the application. There's a personal statement, a diversity statement potentially, resume, transcripts, letters of recommendation, and a test score. And that's pretty much the comprises the four corners of the application process. In addition to addenda, if there's some things to explain, and that may come in handy. So I say that to say that there's only so much that any applicant can do, right? And so if your GPA is not quite where you want it to be, then obviously, you want to bang out the best LSAT score that you can, right? And that goes for anybody, whether or not your GPA is strong or not as strong, right? You want every piece of your application to be as tight as it can be. You want to write the best personal statement that you can, the best diversity statement. And this may be obvious, but I'm a big proponent of focusing on the things that are within, your control, and minimizing or not paying a lot of attention to things that are outside of your control. So again, it's going back to the grades scenario. If your undergraduate grades were not what you would wanted them to be, and if there's some explanation behind that, and that could be you start out in a major that just wasn't a good fit, and that brought your overall GPA down, but you ended up on an upward trend, that's something that you can explain in an addendum. If you had to work, a bunch of hours and had to commute from a far distance while you were an undergraduate student, and that impacted your performance, that's something that admissions officers would want to know about. At the same time, you want to own whatever is yours to own, right? So take responsibility, right? So if your first year in college, you were hanging out, having a good time. I went to UC Santa Barbara for an undergraduate school, and so I definitely had a good time in undergraduate school. I'm not going to lie about that. But if you were having too much fun and not handling your business in the classroom, right, you want to frame that in a way where you take responsibility for that, and then end that addendum on an upswing, which is over the course of my final 2 years, my overall GPA during that period of time was a 3.6, ... Right. So there are ways to contextualize it. And conversely, if your LSAT score is not quite where you want it to be, if there was, problems in the preparation, if you were working several hours while you were preparing, you can share that with us. If your LSAT score tracks other standardized tests that you took, so SAT or ACT, if those test scores underpredicted how you performed in college, then there's an argument to be made there that you believe that your LSAT score likewise will underpredict your ability to perform in law school. So there are ways to work around that, and there are a lot of people around to help you craft those narratives so that they come across as you taking responsibility, not making excuses, but also providing helpful context.
Got it. So sorry to keep putting you on the spot, Tony, but one more kind of related question. So with the pandemic, it seems like there's been a spike in applications during this past cycle, or at least that was kind of the rumor on law school forums and Reddit. At UCLA, how was the admissions process affected? And in the next year, is the law school going to be taking into account activities that happened during the pandemic that might have affected your application.
Got it. Okay. And I realized I didn't answer part of your prior question, so let me hit that quickly, and then I'll jump to the pandemic. As far as students of color applying to law school, my main advice there is to don't be shy about telling your story, right? And whatever that story is. And so your family, your community, your neighborhood, experiences that are important to giving us an understanding of who you are. And that those can be best shared in your personal statement and or a diversity statement. But law schools are looking for applicants who are going to be able to add a distinctive voice or experience or perspective. And so one of the things I've seen over the years that some students of color feel as if that their background and their life experiences are not valued and should not be not be included in their application. And so I would not shy away from telling your story, and at the same time understanding that obviously every person of color doesn't have the same story, right? And so we know that. So don't feel as if your experience has to fit some preconceived narrative. That you tell your story very directly and very plainly, and trust that will have resonance with admissions officers across the country. Switching over to the pandemic and the increase in applications, yeah, that is true. Applications have been up nationally across the board. I don't know what percentage, but it's been relatively significant. No telling what that forebodes for next year or the following application cycle. There's really no way to predict that. I honestly would advise folks to not pay much attention to that. Meaning that you should apply when it's the right time for you to apply, right? And so if you want to be in law school starting fall of 2022, the only way to do that is to apply during this next application cycle, right? And if you don't want to be in law school, then building off of Julia's point, right? The timing, when you decide to go to law school is completely yours, right? And I wouldn't try to predict what the admission cycle is going to look like and how many people are going to be applying. Is it going to be up or down? I say trust that apply. If you apply at the right time, that's right for you, and if you apply to a broad number and range of law schools, that you will have some strong options, and then you can go from there. And worst case is if you at the end of the cycle, if you don't have an option that you're feeling really really good about, then you can come back at it again the following cycle if that makes sense for you.
Great, thank you, Tony. That's also helpful. So then I'm going to take a couple questions that we've gotten in the chat. I guess, Biljana, do need-based scholarships differ for students who might be older, over 25 years old, or if you've worked for a while and you haven't been a student for a while, does any of that impact your financial aid award?
So I would say for merit, of course, that it would not matter because everybody's just, the information based on merit is based on the application, how strong is your application, rather than any sort of financial component of it. For the need component of the scholarship, for someone who is older, the only difference is that I'm, again, presuming from my experience that sometimes a student who is older may have been working. And so we do incorporate students' income as well as parents' income in that calculation. So somebody who has been, let's say, out of school for a few years and has been working and is now applying for the law school and is 25 years old, we will still require that student to provide parental information as well as their own information. So students are considered to be dependent until they're 29 years of age or older, and they will need to provide parental information. So for that particular reason, I wouldn't say it's different. I'm just saying that the circumstances could be different because of the work component. Somebody who comes from undergraduate school directly into the law school, again, they may not have a work experience, so they may not show that there's any income. So it's sort of different computation in that sort of process. But other than that, it's looked the same. It's just depending on the circumstances.
Okay, great. So then I'm not sure if this is a question for Tony or B, but how does the financial aid process work if you're on the wait list? Do you get your award, or what is that timing like?
I can speak for need component of the scholarship. So for the need-based scholarship, Dean scholarship, we as a financial aid office, we will process those throughout the admitting cycle. So we process them throughout the summer and until the school starts in fall. So for us, there is no difference if a student is on a wait list and then eventually they get admitted. We will still, of course, determine eligibility for the need component of their scholarship, as long as, of course, they provide all the information. So there is no negative impact in terms of the need component for a student who hasn't been admitted, at the regular cycle, maybe during, early part of the year.
Yeah, and I'll touch upon that just briefly. In terms of students who are admitted off the wait list, the so-called merit, aid, component, it's a little trickier. Generally speaking, if a student is admitted off the wait list, they may not have the same kind of strong competing offers from other schools, right? So we talked about negotiating and leverage it. So they just may not have a similar kind of leverage. So not impossible, but it's also typically later in the cycle, right? And so good amount of the funds available for merit aid have already been allocated and spoken for. But that all just entails a conversation and asking what type of merit aid is available at that point in time.
Okay, great, thanks. So then, are there financial aid options for undocumented students? Biljana?
Sure. So undocumented students, as we know, are not eligible for federal aid, but we do still provide gift aid to undocumented students, just as we would for all the other students. So again, merit component and the need component of the Dean Scholarship is available to students who are undocumented as long as they're AB 540 eligible. They just have to meet the same criteria, of course, as everyone else. So as long as they have all the information that we require from all the other students, we will, of course, process their information and determine eligibility on need as well as merit, which will be on admission side.
Okay, great. So then maybe Julia, I'll start with you on this question. How are you dealing with funding your living expenses and things other than tuition, maybe fees for books, fees for clubs or other organizations?
I think I mentioned this earlier, but I'm completely reliant on student loans and scholarship right now. So the Dean Scholarship that I got from UCLA just goes completely towards tuition. And then I think I had to take out, there's the Grad Plus loan, and then there's the unsubsidized loan and different names for the loans, but I had to take some out. And then first semester, I was actually living at home and doing class remotely, but I decided to move out to Westwood later on. So I just reached out to the financial aid office to ask them how to work with that because my housing situation changed. And they just adjusted my financial award notice and I got a bigger disbursement of loan money after that. And then when I was considering summer jobs also, I knew my lease is going to go into the summer too. I was trying to think about how to pay for the summer housing too. And I talked to the financial aid office then also, and they told me how much money I had left over, that I could ask for. And I think, yeah, that's how I've been approaching it. I've just been taking out more and asking for more when I need it. And I didn't take out everything that I could from the beginning.
Got it. So then I guess, Biljana, can you talk a little bit more about sort of how your aid package changes each year? And then if something happens in the middle of the year and you need more aid, like Julia mentioned, what do you do?
Sure. So as we talked about earlier, the gift aid sort of, if it's a commitment for 3 years, that will stay each year. So for example, if you were to be awarded $15,000 scholarship, let's say merit scholarship, that scholarship is a commitment for 3 years and it will be there each year for all your 3 years. So in addition to the scholarship, if the student fills out the FAFSA form, what it will happen, then the financial aid office will, in addition to the gift aid, they will also offer a student an option to take out the federal loans. As Julia mentioned, there are different names for them. The graduate and professional students are eligible for 2 federal loans, and they're called unsubsidized loan and a graduate plus loan. Unsubsidized loan is limited at $20,500 for graduate students, so nobody would be able to ask for more than that. And then the graduate plus loan sort of goes up to the cost of attendance minus any other aid the student has, and sort of kind of closes the gap up to that budget that student actually has. So Both of these loans, again, are federal loans. For students who are doing maybe eligible or planning to go in a federal public loan service forgiveness, these are the loans that are eligible for the forgiveness from the federal government. So as long as students basically continue to take in federal loans, those loans will be eligible for federal public loan service forgiveness. And so once the student obtains these loans or the amount of loans they think they need, that disbursement goes on to the student account. So everything goes to the student account, all the scholarships, all the loans, they're dispersed to the student's Bruin bill account. Once the tuition is paid, that it's sitting on the Bruin bill account. If there is more financial aid than the tuition and fees that are being charged, the excess of that financial aid will be refunded to the student for living expenses. During the year, if a student decides, well, just like Julia said, well, I haven't taken all of my financial aid, but now I need more. As long as the student still has eligibility in financial aid, they need additional loan they haven't taken out, we can certainly provide a new financial aid offer with a new loan offer that student basically would be able then to request an additional amount. So the federal loans are available for the entire academic year. So student doesn't have to decide right from the bat as to how much financial aid one would need. At the same time, if a student takes out the full amount that is offered to them at the beginning of the year, but then closer to the fall, the end of the fall, they decide, well, I guess I have some money left. I actually shouldn't have taken this much loan. We can certainly return a portion of the loan the student has not utilized. And it would be always better, of course, for students to return those funds to the school, and then the school will return those funds to the lender so that, of course, there's less debt at the end of the 3-year period.
Got it. So then B, you mentioned loan forgiveness. Can you just talk a little bit about the loan repayment assistance program for public interest students at UCLA?
Sure. So what I mentioned is the federal program, which is a federal public loan service forgiveness, and I'm just going to call it as acronym PSLF. So that's the federal program. And in addition to that, of course, the UCLA also has its own loan repayment assistance program, or LRAP. So the federal program basically asks for students who are graduates at that point who are going into public interest work, if they're in a public interest position for 120 months, and during that same time, they make qualified payments to their qualified loans. After 120 payments they have made, if there is any remaining balance on their loans, that amount will be forgiven by the government and council. So that's where the forgiveness comes. During those 120 months, which is technically 10 years, the student can elect to make a payment under one of those income-driven repayment plans, which basically they take a borrower's income rather than the debt to determine how much one is able to contribute towards their loans. In most cases, the government will take either 10 or 15% of one's discretionary income, and then determine based on that 10% or 15% what is the yearly amount of the loan debt the student will have for that year. Usually that amount is on average about 1/3 of what usually student would have to pay if the student were under a regular standard repayment plan. So the benefit of the federal program is that, first of all, the repayment is lower, which makes it possible for students who are in a public interest to technically continue making payments on their loans while their earning potential is less than for someone who's going into private practice, of course. Then you're paying those loans for 10 years or 120 payments. The reason we say 120 payments, because it doesn't have to be consecutive. So 120 payments could happen in 10 years, could happen in 12 years. So as long as you make 120 payments, that's what qualifies a student to actually seek forgiveness. And then the third portion, of course, is that benefit is that anything that it's left over after 120 payments is forgiven by the federal government and not taxed. So that, in a nutshell, is a federal program. But how LRAP basically kind of comes in play is that during those 10 years or 120 payments, when borrowers are making those qualified payments to their servicer, then the graduate can apply for loan repayment assistance from UCLA. So if, for example, the government suggests that monthly payment to a borrower is $300, Student would then come back to UCLA and say, okay, I would like to submit my LREP application to determine how much of this $300 LREP can help me with. And so in some cases, LREP contributes the full amount of that 300, and sometimes there is no cost out of pocket for a graduate who is doing LREP and Federal Public Loan Service forgiveness. And sometimes maybe there's a portion that graduates needs to contribute towards their loans if they're not fully qualified. But just in a nutshell, in terms of who is eligible for LREP, just so that I can mention this. So currently anybody who earns $75,000 or less, and they're of course in a public interest position, as long as all the other criteria, is met in terms of the assets, let's say, they're qualified for 100% of LREP assistance. So as I mentioned in that earlier example, if someone has $300 in monthly loan payments, they earn less than $75,000, they apply for LREP. LREP will front their monthly payments to student, and then they will use LREP to sort of kind of make payments throughout the year, because we will front the entire 12-month of payments to the student, and they will technically use those funds to pay off their loans.
Got it. Thank you. Tony, I'm going to come back to you with an audience question, kind of a subjective question, but what sticks with you the most when reading an applicant's file?
Yeah, it's hard to nail that down in any bite size. I mean, I'll tell you the impression that sticks with me is when I get to the end of an application and I feel like, wow, that's someone that I would like to meet. That's someone who's seems like an interesting person. That's someone who has a perspective that would add to what we're trying to do at UCLA. I tell you this, the former dean of admissions at Berkeley Law School said that before he would look at any other piece of the application, before LSAT, GPA, anything else, he would read the personal statement, because he'd want to know, like, who is this person, right? And is this someone who's going to come to our law school and enhance what we're doing? Is this someone who's going to add a voice or an experience that would otherwise be unreflected or under-reflected? Or is this someone who's going to, come in and just take up a seat and suck up some oxygen, right? And the latter is not very exciting. And so, when I get to the end of a personal statement, the end of an application, I want to feel like, wow, if I met that person, I'd want to ask them about this situation, or ask them about what that was like, or how they navigated that. And it doesn't all have to be about hardship or, up from struggle, but something interesting, something other than being a member of your pre-law society, which is that's all fine, but a bunch of people are members of their pre-law society, right? So I want to know about like you, like who are you? And if we admit you, what can we count on you to deliver and contribute as a function of your experiences? So I don't know if that helps, that there's no one particular thing, but really more of an overall vibe, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, it's helpful. So then, Tony, people are asking if they apply multiple times, does that have an impact on their application? And if they apply in different cycles, do you need to submit a whole new application each time?
All right, so yeah, I'll take the latter question first. So if you do, if you're a reapplicant, then yes, you will complete the application, submit a new application. That new application could very well include the same letters of recommendation that were included in an initial attempt, which is perfectly fine. They don't have to. I mean, typically what schools will know that you have applied previously, and mainly will look to see what, if anything, has changed, right? So is there a new and improved, LSAT score? Is there, a different, work experience? Is there, are there different letters of recommendation? And so you want to be thinking about and getting feedback from law schools as to maybe why your applications weren't so successful the first go around or second go around, to get a sense of where you can have a better result in the second, the next time. So the question is, does it look badly? Candidly, at a certain point, yes. I mean, meaning like, so if someone has applied 4 or 5 times with the same profile, right, same grade, same LSAT scores, and there's nothing, sort of new that's changed, it's highly unlikely that there would be a different result. Where we typically will see someone who's successful on a reapplication, one or two things, or both, is an improved LSAT score. That's probably the most impactful way. and just a tighter application, right? And so, a better personal statement, stronger letters of recommendation, all those can make the difference. I'd be lying if I said that the admissions process was scientific, right? It's far from it. It's human beings like me reviewing applications, and we all are bringing our own biases, our own subjectivities, and doing the best job that we can. But we're subject to impression, obviously. And so to the extent that there was an impression that said, okay, this student is strong file, but just not quite there, it may be the same reviewer who looks at that same application the next year and says, wow, this is really a good file, interesting student, let's admit them. So I don't want to suggest that it's random, because it's not random, but it's also not, we're not computers, right? We're human beings subject to all kinds of influences and impressions.
Great, thanks. So then, Julia, I'm going to come back to you quickly. How did you approach your personal statement? I guess, were there any specific things you wanted to address in it?
Yeah, I remember I just took a swing at it first and wrote, like, I think just writing it first, like getting something out on paper is important. And then I took it first to the writing center at my college. And the person who was there looked over like grad school applications for like anyone. So she looked at it and then she drew me like a picture of a martini glass. And then she said, like, you start up here at the top where you start broad, and then you think of like a couple moments, like defining moments that led you to your decision of going to law school. And then at the bottom, you like go, it gets skinny because that's when you're talking about your moments. And then at the bottom, it's where you talk about why that school and what's making you apply there. So I think I wrote my personal statement over like 3 times. And I shared it with that writing advisor a couple times. And then I shared it with my pre-law advisor like 2 times. And then I kind of felt shy about showing like friends, but I did end up sharing it with one friend, and she gave me some feedback on like, I wasn't really looking for feedback on like grammar or anything. I was looking for feedback on like how she felt after reading it. And I think that was helpful because I wanted to get an idea of like, what kind of impression do you get of me after reading my personal statement? So I think it helped a lot to just like have different opinions, but it's like completely personal decision. Like you can choose to not have anyone look at it if that makes you feel more comfortable. But I think for me, that helped. Oh, and I want to say, I took every opportunity to say more about myself where I could. So I wrote diversity statements for schools that I applied to also. So I had to decide like, what do I want to include in the diversity statement? What do I want to include in the personal statement? Because in the personal statement, you do want to make it about like the law school admissions committee does want to know why you're applying and why law school over any other like graduate program.
Great, thanks, Julia. Sorry, jumping around here a little bit. Another audience question. At UCLA, if you go early decision, does that impact, I guess, how does that work with financial aid? And then even if you don't go early decision, does the timing of when you submit your application affect your aid process at all?
Great, so I'll take that. So applying early decision, some schools have a program where if you apply by some early date, let's say, mid-November or end of November, then you will receive a very quick admissions decision from that school, let's say by the middle or end of December. And at least at UCLA, that's a binding program, meaning that if you apply through early decision and you're admitted, then you're obligated to withdraw your applications from every other school. I actually don't think it's in most students' best interest. The only reason why I would encourage someone to do that is if UCLA or any other school is your hands down #1 choice that you would go there no matter what, then it makes sense. But if you want to keep yourself kind of in play, if you will, for any number of schools, then applying early decision is not the best move. If you are admitted early decision, you are still eligible for need-based aid that B spoke about, but you are not eligible or considered for merit-based aid, and so you basically cut yourself out of a potential revenue stream. And so I just think that that's not the best move for most folks. Applying early as a general concept makes sense, right? And so law schools will typically open their application process around September. Our application process runs from September to the 1st of February. So you can apply at any point in time during that cycle. The later you apply, though, just understand that some slots have already been filled, right? Because we start admitting people all the way along the way. And while you could still very well get admitted even if you applied on our absolute last date, you're just now being considered for a smaller number of open slots. And so my advice there is you don't have to be the first one in the door, so you don't have to apply September 1st, but you don't want to be the last person at the door either. It's my best analogy or metaphor is like showing up to a party. Right, you don't have to be the first person there. In fact, that's not even cool to be the first person there. But if you're the last person there, there might be some food left, but there might be some crumpled up potato chips. There might be some drink left, but you might be left out. So get there, get there in time where you can enjoy the fruits of the entire, admissions process and not be, sort of looking for scraps.
Well, thanks, Tony. So then, Biljana, we're getting a couple questions about how need-based financial aid is calculated, and with the FAFSA, when do you have to disclose your parents' income?
Okay, so for students, once they're admitted, we do ask that they submit their FAFSA if they haven't already, and also provide a parental information. So as I mentioned, anybody who is 29 or older is considered to be independent. So if you are going to be dependent student, then you do have to provide your parental information on the FAFSA. So just as you would do the FAFSA on your own for your own information, at that point, you would just include your parental information. So we will receive that information on our end. And then in addition, as I mentioned, there's a small need application. And I say it's small because it only has a couple of additional questions that FAFSA doesn't cover. And truly, you can fill it out probably in just 5 minutes. So that's a supplemental form that we use in addition to the FAFSA. And so what we do, we basically use the data from both of these forms and then determine, similarly to if one can remember the Pell Grant is an undergraduate student. So similarly like that, we basically determine students' expected family contribution, which comprises of student contribution and parental contribution. And so that expected family contribution tells us basically sort of what scale student falls. And based on the numbers, we just determine what level of the need award student is eligible for.
Okay, great. So then just as a follow-up, if you are under 29, but practically you're financially independent from your parents, do you still have to disclose your parents' income?
So there are a couple of exceptions to that rule. And of course, we list that on our website, but just to kind of highlight a few. If you have not been dependent on anyone's tax return for the last 7 years, we would consider you to be independent after you provide us verification of that. If you were independent as an undergraduate student, but not based on age or marital status, if your undergraduate institution considered you independent, we will also honor that, and we will, however, ask the verification of that dependency override just to confirm that. Also, if you have a dependent on your own that you provide more than 50% to their support, you will also be considered independent. Also, if you're a veteran, same case, as well as if you were a ward of the state or ward of a court as a minor, then we would consider you independent.
Okay, thanks. And just as another follow-up, is there a level at which a student could get a full ride based on need-based aid, full tuition?
So need-based aid is most likely about 50% of tuition, the highest amount. But Tony may touch on this. We do have a full tuition scholarships that students could apply for. And so those are usually in an early cycle of admission.
Okay, great, thanks.
The quick answer is yes. We have an Achievement Fellows Scholarship Program that is designed to award and celebrate folks who have accomplished while navigating, distinctive challenges throughout their life. And so that's available. And that's a full tuition scholarship. And then some students are able to get full or close to full by virtue of having very strong offers from peer schools. So there are definitely students who come out with little to no debt. It's not many. It's a few handful.
Sure. Okay. So we just have a couple minutes left. I'm just going to try to knock out a couple more audience questions. Tony, do you have advice for students who are waitlisted? Is there anything that students on the waitlist can do to help strengthen their application?
Yeah, and if anyone's in that situation now, feel free to email me and I can take you through more a strategy. But basically, you want to be active and engaged without being a pest. You don't want to email us every day or every week, but maybe once every 3 to 4 weeks, you want to drop us a note saying that you remain interested. You can do a class visit, although those are about to be wrapped up. A virtual tour to indicate your interest. You can add an additional letter of recommendation. If you have another letter that you can make available. So there are certain things that you can do. Thanks for dropping it in Katie. Yeah, so feel free to reach out if you have questions about that. So there are things, but wait is the operative word in waitlist, and there's not tons and tons you can do, but there are some steps you can take.
Great, thanks. And then if someone took a class, pass, no pass, and didn't get a grade, in undergrad, does that detract from their GPA or their application?
Someone took a class, pass, no pass, and didn't pass, or
I guess passed, but I guess chose that option.
That's fine. Yeah, and we certainly in this pandemic, we understand that students who have that option choose that for a whole variety of reasons. So there's no negative connotation to having passing grades on your record.
Okay, great. And then one more question about recommendations. Are professional recommendations from a work supervisor weighed less than academic recommendations, or how do students make that decision on who to ask?
Yeah, so they're not weighed less necessarily, but start from the premise of this, that law schools are looking at letters of recommendation to corroborate that you are an excellent student and that you will be an excellent law student. And so typically it's going to be someone who's taught you, who can speak to those, right? Speak to your academic strengths, if you will. If you do ask a supervisor or someone from a professional realm, you want to have them focus on the types of skills that law schools value. So your critical thinking, right? Problem solving, analytical reasoning, your writing skills. So to the extent that you've been able to demonstrate those skills on the job, you'd want them to focus on those on those aspects, because that's what law schools are really most looking for.
Okay, thanks. Biljana, a question about loans. How high are the interest rates, and are there grace periods for them?
Yeah, so interest rates, basically they change each year. So currently, because of the pandemic, the interest rates have been frozen to 0% through September, but of course that will change soon. So for the current academic year, the interest rates are 4.3 for unsubsidized and 5.3 for unsubsidized. For the graduate plus. So it's usually the graduate plus, it's usually about 1% higher than the unsubsidized loan, and also graduate plus loan has a higher fees. So as I mentioned, interest rates are changed each year, but whatever interest rate is for that particular year, that loan will keep that interest rate for the life of the loan. So you may have 3 years with 3 different loans and 3 different interest rates. But given the fact, as I mentioned, that Grad Plus and unsubsidized also have its own interest rate, you may have 6 different interest rates for 3 years that you will be here.
Okay, great. And is your financial aid package impacted if you choose to defer?
I will have Tony answer that question.
Yeah, it's a really good question. So it depends. I mean, so it depends from school to school, and even within a school. So what I say, if someone who's in that situation, you want to have that conversation then at that time, right? When you're making a decision about deferring, find out, like, is your scholarship package, locked in, and will that be honored for the following year? in most instances, it will. I can't speak for other schools, but yeah, you'd want to have that nailed down. I deferred my admission to law school, and my financial aid award was set, so I knew during that gap year, if you will, that I knew what my award was going to be.
If I can just add to that, I think it's sort of slightly different for need, given the fact that need is determined based on the tax year that we're currently in and that students are submitting their information. So someone who is applying for need for the following year, it's a different FAFSA application. It's a different tax year information. So need component could be different rather than what merit can commit and promise for the following year.
Got it. Well, I think that's our time. Well, thank you all so much. Thank you to our panelists and thanks to our audience for great questions. I will turn it back over to Katie.
Awesome. Thank you, Erin. Thank you to the admissions and financial aid offices and to Julia for sharing her experience as a student. In terms of scholarships, there are a ton of non-UCLA scholarships. So just encourage you, like the panelists said, to do some Googling. There's a bunch of lists out there that, you know, even if it's a couple $100s, it can be helpful to meet some of those expenses.